It was just an ordinary afternoon, sunlight slipping into the kitchen, when she walked in. My sister-in-law, smiling like she always did, but something in her eyes made my heart stumble. I told myself it was nothing, just family, just routine, but when her hand brushed mine as we reached for the same spoon, the world seemed to stop. In that moment, I knew something dangerous, something beautiful, had begun. The day had started like any other, slow and ordinary, with no warning of what was about to unfold. I was in the kitchen, the faint sound of traffic from the street humming in the background, the smell of coffee lingering in the air, and the sunlight stretching lazily across the counter. It was the kind of calm morning I had grown used to, a moment of peace before the usual chaos of family life began. My brother had stepped out earlier for errands, and I found myself enjoying the quiet. That quiet was broken when I heard footsteps approaching, and then the sound of the kitchen door creaking open. It was her. My sister-in-law walked in, casual and unassuming, her hair pulled back in a loose knot, a soft sweater draped over her frame. She greeted me with the same familiar warmth she always did, her voice carrying that gentle tone that somehow always made me feel seen. I thought it was nothing unusual. We had always been close, perhaps closer than most sisters-in-law should be, but I had never questioned it before. She moved around the kitchen effortlessly, opening the refrigerator, pulling out vegetables, asking lightly if I had eaten yet. It was all so simple, so ordinary, but something about the way she looked at me when she asked made me pause. Her eyes lingered just a moment too long, like she was waiting for an answer that went deeper than my stomach's needs. I brushed it off, but my chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. We began chopping together, side by side, our shoulders occasionally brushing. Every small touch sent a spark through me that felt foreign, almost forbidden. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to tell myself it was just in my head, but I couldn't deny the way my pulse quickened every time she leaned closer, every time I caught the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the warmth of the kitchen air. She laughed at something I said, a laugh that rang out light and genuine, and it wrapped around me like a song I wanted to hear again and again. It wasn't just her laughter, it was the way she leaned in, the way her hand briefly touched mine on the counter, the way she didn't pull away immediately. It was nothing, it was everything. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the rhythm of the knife against the cutting board, the hum of the refrigerator, anything to silence the wild thoughts beginning to stir in my mind. But when I turned my head, she was already looking at me, her expression unreadable, her lips curved in the faintest of smiles. My breath caught. That look stayed with me long after it should have passed. It was the kind of look that said more than words, the kind of look that made the silence around us heavier. I told myself it was nothing. She was married to my brother. She was family. This was impossible. And yet, the more I tried to ignore it, the more undeniable it became. Every little movement in the kitchen felt charged, like the air itself had changed. My hands trembled slightly when I passed her a spoon, and when her fingers brushed mine, she didn't pull away as quickly as she should have. Her eyes softened, and for a split second, I thought I saw the same confusion, the same question, reflected in them. The kitchen had always been just a place for meals, for casual conversation, for family gatherings. But that afternoon, it became something else entirely. It became the quiet stage where something unspoken stirred, where boundaries blurred, and where I felt the first pangs of an attraction I could neither control nor admit. By the time we finished cooking, the food on the counter seemed like the least important thing in the room. My thoughts were no longer on lunch or errands or the day ahead, they were on her, on every small moment that suddenly felt monumental. I carried the weight of it in silence, pretending nothing had shifted, but inside me, everything had. I knew this was dangerous, I knew this was wrong, but I also knew something had awoken that could not be easily put back to sleep. That day in the kitchen changed everything. though neither of us said a word about it. The silence was louder than anything we could have spoken, and it followed me long after she left the room, echoing in my mind, leaving me with a truth I wasn't ready to face but could no longer deny. The rest of that day felt like a blur, though the smallest moments stayed etched in my memory as if they were carved there. I tried to convince myself that what I felt in the kitchen was simply my imagination, some fleeting spark caused by proximity or the warmth of her presence. But when I found myself avoiding her gaze at the dining table later, when I noticed her glancing at me while talking to my brother, I knew it wasn't something I could dismiss so easily. Every look, every touch, replayed itself in my mind, refusing to fade. That evening, when the dishes were done and my brother excused himself to take a call in the other room, she and I were left alone again. The air grew heavy in the silence, the same kind of silence that had wrapped around us in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, her arms folded casually, but her eyes were anything but casual. They studied me, quietly, searching for something. I tried to busy myself by wiping the table, but I could feel her gaze like a weight pressing against my skin. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant. "You've been quiet today," she said. I laughed nervously, brushing it off, muttering something about being tired. But her expression didn't change. She tilted her head slightly, and her eyes lingered, as though she didn't believe me. For a moment, I thought she might say something else, something that would pull the truth out into the open, but then the sound of my brother's voice returning broke the moment, and she straightened up, her mask slipping back into place effortlessly. Still, that question stayed with me, the way she asked it, the way she seemed to notice a shift in me that I was trying desperately to hide. That night, when I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face in the soft glow of the kitchen, the way her fingers lingered on mine, the warmth of her laugh. I turned over, restless, frustrated with myself for feeling something I wasn't supposed to feel. She was family now, tied to my brother, and I hated myself for how much I couldn't stop thinking about her. Days passed, but the tension didn't fade. If anything, it grew. Little things became too noticeable, the way she smiled at me when no one else was looking, the way she always seemed to find reasons to be in the same room. Once, she brushed past me in the hallway, close enough that I could feel her warmth, and when I turned, I caught her looking back at me with a quick glance that made my chest tighten. I wanted to tell myself it was all coincidence, that I was inventing meaning where there was none. But then there were moments when she let her guard down, moments that made it impossible to believe this was one-sided. Like the afternoon I came into the kitchen again and found her sitting at the counter, a cup of tea in her hands. She looked up, and there was something raw in her eyes, something that made me pause. She patted the chair beside her, and when I sat, she didn't speak at first. Instead, she just studied me, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. The silence stretched, almost unbearable, until finally she whispered, "Do you ever feel like you're holding something in that you can't share?" My breath caught, and for a long second I couldn't answer. Her question was vague, but it felt loaded, like it carried far more weight than the words themselves. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but the look on her face stopped me. She was vulnerable in a way I had never seen before, her confidence softened, her eyes glistening with a truth she wasn't ready to speak aloud. My reply was clumsy, but honest. I nodded and said, "Every day." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something more, but then she simply smiled, small and knowing, and looked away. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't just heavy, it was intimate. When she stood to leave, she brushed her hand against my shoulder, almost absent-mindedly, but it left a trail of fire that lingered long after she was gone. That night, I couldn't stop replaying her words. I couldn't stop wondering if she was feeling what I was, if the electricity between us was something real or just another trick of my desperate mind. The confusion consumed me, pulling me deeper into a storm I didn't know how to escape. It was wrong, every part of me knew that, but the way my heart reacted around her, the way I craved every accidental touch and lingering look, felt truer than anything I had ever known. And for the first time, I allowed myself to wonder what would happen if the truth between us finally slipped free, if we both stopped pretending it wasn't there. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope, every step careful yet dangerously thrilling. I told myself I was imagining things, that her words in the kitchen were just general, nothing meant for me specifically. But my body betrayed me every time she walked into the room. My eyes sought her out without permission, my pulse quickened when she laughed, and my chest tightened when her gaze lingered on me too long. I was restless, torn between wanting distance and craving her presence, caught in the storm of something I couldn't control. It was late one evening when the line between us blurred even more. My brother had been called into work unexpectedly, leaving me and her alone in the house. The silence was thick as we both moved around the living room, each pretending to be occupied. She was curled up on the couch with a blanket, scrolling through her phone, and I sat at the far end of the room pretending to watch television. But the truth was, every part of me was hyper-aware of her, her bare feet tucked under her legs, the loose strands of hair falling over her face, the faint smile tugging at her lips as she looked at something on her screen. The air felt heavy with things unsaid, and I wondered if she could hear how hard my heart was beating. After a while, she set her phone down and looked at me. Her voice was casual at first, but there was a softness beneath it. "You're always so quiet when it's just us," she said. I shrugged, trying to sound unaffected. "I guess I'm just not used to being alone with you." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and her eyes flickered, surprised. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but instead of laughing it off or changing the subject, she leaned forward slightly, her expression curious. "And why is that?" The question hung between us, daring me to answer honestly, but I couldn't. Instead, I mumbled something about being shy and quickly looked away. Still, I could feel her eyes on me, studying me with an intensity that made it impossible to breathe. Minutes passed before she spoke again, this time in a quieter voice. "You know, I notice things. The way you look at me sometimes. The way you pull back when I get too close." My whole body froze, the blood rushing in my ears. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but her words cut through the space between us, sharp and true. My lips parted, but no sound came out. She tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. "Am I wrong?" she asked. I could barely meet her eyes, but I shook my head, whispering, "No." The silence that followed was electric, and when she finally moved, it was slow and deliberate. She shifted closer, her blanket slipping slightly off her shoulder, and the warmth of her body filled the space. My breath caught as I felt her hand rest gently on mine, her touch light, tentative, as if testing the waters. "I don't know what this means," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "But I feel it too. And it scares me." Those words shattered the fragile barrier I had been holding onto. Everything I had been denying, everything I had buried, suddenly felt real and undeniable. My heart ached with the weight of it, torn between fear and longing. I turned to her, meeting her eyes fully for the first time in what felt like forever. There was vulnerability there, raw and unguarded, but also a spark that mirrored my own. I wanted to tell her everything, that I thought about her constantly, that her touch set my skin on fire, that I was terrified of what this could mean for us, for my brother, for the family. But the words refused to come, caught between the fear of reality and the desire that burned inside me. Instead, I simply squeezed her hand, holding onto it like a lifeline. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening, and for a long while we just sat there in silence, connected by something neither of us could name but both of us understood. When my brother finally came home that night, she pulled her hand back quickly, and we both pretended nothing had happened. But the truth lingered in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Every time our eyes met afterward, it was there, humming between us like a secret melody only we could hear. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, and I knew deep down that there was no turning back now. Something had shifted, and the line we had been towing so carefully was beginning to blur into something impossible to ignore. The following days felt like walking in a dream where reality bent around us. Everything seemed ordinary on the surface, but beneath it, there was a constant hum of tension, like electricity waiting to spark. I tried to distract myself, to keep my focus on anything else, but it was impossible. Every little thing she did seemed amplified, the way she tied her hair up in a messy bun, the way she laughed at something small, the way her hand brushed mine when we passed each other in the hallway. It wasn't just attraction anymore, it was an ache, a pull that refused to let me go. One evening, my brother announced that he'd be working late again. The words barely left his mouth before my stomach tightened, because I knew what that meant, another evening alone with her. He kissed her on the cheek, gave me a nod, and left, completely unaware of the silent storm brewing between us. As soon as the door closed, the house felt different, quieter, heavier, charged. I tried to busy myself in the kitchen, washing dishes that didn't really need washing, pretending I didn't notice her leaning against the counter, watching me. The sound of running water couldn't drown out the way my heart hammered in my chest. I finally turned off the tap, drying my hands slowly, trying to act normal, but she didn't move. Her eyes followed me, steady and unflinching, and I could feel them burning into me. "You've been avoiding me," she said softly, her tone more statement than question. My throat went dry, and I forced a weak laugh. "I've just been busy." She shook her head, stepping closer. "No. It's not that. It's because of the other night." The air in the kitchen thickened instantly, my breath catching as her words hung there. I wanted to deny it, to push the moment away, but I couldn't. Instead, I whispered, "Yes." She took another step toward me, closing the gap between us. My back pressed lightly against the counter as she stood just inches away, her presence overwhelming. "I can't stop thinking about it," she admitted, her voice low and trembling. "About us. About what this means." Her honesty sent a shiver through me, equal parts fear and relief. I had been drowning in these feelings alone, convinced they were one-sided, but here she was, confessing the same storm. "I don't know how to handle it," I whispered back, my voice barely audible. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine as if trying to find courage in them. Then, almost in slow motion, her hand lifted to my face. Her fingers brushed against my cheek so gently that I nearly melted at the touch. My breath hitched, my body frozen in the gravity of that moment, torn between pulling away and leaning in. "We can't do this," I murmured, though my voice lacked conviction. Her hand lingered against my skin, and she whispered, "Then why does it feel like we already are?" The question cracked something inside me, breaking down the fragile wall I had built. My body betrayed me, leaning into her touch even as my mind screamed of the consequences. Her thumb brushed my cheekbone, and the warmth of her hand seeped into me, grounding me in a way nothing else ever had. I wanted to kiss her, to close the unbearable distance, but the weight of reality pressed down hard. "He's my brother," I whispered, my voice breaking. She closed her eyes briefly, her hand trembling against my skin. "I know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And that's what makes this so impossible." Yet neither of us moved. We stayed there, suspended in that moment, our breaths mingling, hearts beating so loudly it felt like the whole house could hear. It was the most dangerous kind of intimacy, not physical, not yet, but emotional, raw, and terrifyingly real. Finally, she pulled her hand away, stepping back with a shaky exhale. The loss of her touch was immediate and painful, like the sudden cold after warmth. She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter as if steadying herself. "We have to stop," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her conflict. I nodded slowly, though the ache in my chest told me it was a lie we both desperately wanted to believe. That night, I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of what had happened in the kitchen. Her touch lingered on my skin, her words echoed in my head, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't convince myself to let it go. Something had already begun between us, something neither of us could deny, and deep down I knew, this was only the beginning. The days that followed were some of the most confusing of my life. I told myself to stay away, to build a safe distance, but it was impossible when we were under the same roof. Every morning, I'd wake to the sound of her moving around the kitchen, her laughter echoing softly down the hallway, and my heart would betray me, racing at the thought of seeing her again. I tried to bury myself in small tasks, cleaning, cooking, running errands, but she was always there, slipping into my orbit as though the universe refused to let us drift apart. What made it worse was the way she looked at me now. It wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't disguised as casual family warmth or friendly concern. It was open, raw, and filled with a longing that mirrored my own. Whenever our eyes met across the room, the air thickened, and I could see the unspoken words dancing between us, waiting to be acknowledged. One evening, after my brother had left for another late shift, I was sitting at the kitchen table trying to read. The words on the page blurred, meaningless, because all I could focus on was her presence. She walked in quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea, and placed one in front of me before sitting down across the table. For a moment, we didn't speak. The silence was heavy, not awkward, but weighted with all the things we hadn't said. She finally broke it with a quiet confession. "I've been thinking about you all the time." My throat tightened, and I tried to steady my voice. "You shouldn't say that." But my words were weak, stripped of conviction, because the truth was, I wanted to hear them more than anything. She leaned forward, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I can't help it. I've tried to ignore it, to push it away, but I can't. And I don't think you can either." Her honesty left me exposed, because she was right. I hadn't been able to escape her in my mind. I set the book aside, my hands trembling slightly, and admitted, "You're right. I can't." The admission hung between us, a dangerous thread tying us closer. She reached across the table slowly, hesitantly, as if giving me a chance to stop her. When her fingers brushed mine, a jolt shot through me, the kind of spark that burned straight to the core. My breath caught, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my hand rest against hers, the contact small but monumental. We sat like that for what felt like an eternity, our eyes locked, both of us silently asking the same question: how far could we let this go before it broke everything? She finally rose from her chair, moving around the table until she stood beside me. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure she could hear it. She reached down, gently taking my hand, and pulled me to my feet. For a moment, I thought she would kiss me, that the dam would finally break, but she stopped inches away, her breath trembling against my face. "Tell me to stop," she whispered, her voice desperate and pleading. But I couldn't. I searched for the words, but none came. Instead, I leaned the slightest bit closer, my silence an answer on its own. The world outside seemed to disappear as we stood there, our faces so close, our breaths mingling, the weight of what we were about to do pressing down with impossible force. At the very last second, she pulled back, her hand covering her mouth as though she had just realized the depth of what was happening. "We can't," she whispered, shaking her head, though her eyes betrayed her longing. "If we cross this line, there's no going back." I felt the sting of her words, but I also knew the truth: she was right. The line was already blurred, already fading, and pretending otherwise was just a lie. I reached for her hand, holding it tight. "Maybe we already crossed it," I said softly. She looked at me then, her eyes filling with something between fear and desire, and I knew she felt the same. The moment passed slowly, painfully, until she let out a shaky breath and pulled away again. She turned her back to me, her hands gripping the counter as if holding herself together. "We have to be careful," she whispered. "If anyone finds out," she didn't finish, but she didn't need to. The risk was unthinkable, and yet the pull between us was undeniable. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the way her hand had felt in mine, the way her breath had trembled against my face. It was torture, but it was also the first time in my life I felt truly alive, as if I had stumbled into something I was always meant to find. I knew it wasn't over. No matter how hard we tried to resist, something between us had already taken root, and it was only going to grow stronger. The days after that night became a storm inside my heart. Everything seemed louder, sharper, more alive when she was around. Every glance felt like a confession, every brush of her hand like a promise I wasn't supposed to hear. I tried to tell myself to stay away, to build walls, but it was impossible. We were pulled together by something invisible, something stronger than logic, stronger than rules, stronger than fear. The tension between us was no longer something we could pretend to ignore. It filled every corner of the house, lingering in the air like a secret we both carried. One evening, the house was quiet again. My brother had called to say he would be working late, and I was alone in the living room, trying to focus on the TV, though my mind was restless. Then I heard footsteps. She walked in, barefoot, her hair loose, a softness in her eyes that told me she had been thinking the same thoughts I had. She didn't sit far from me this time. Instead, she sank into the couch beside me, her body close enough that I could feel her warmth. For a long moment, we said nothing, the only sound the faint hum of the television. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I can't keep pretending anymore." My chest tightened, my breath catching at the honesty in her words. I turned to look at her, and the vulnerability on her face nearly undid me. She wasn't just my sister-in-law in that moment. She was a woman standing at the edge of her own truth, trembling but brave enough to step into it. I felt my hand move before my mind caught up, reaching for hers. When our fingers intertwined, it was like the world exhaled, as if everything had been holding its breath, waiting for this. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time, I let myself relax into her presence without guilt, without denial. We sat like that for what felt like forever, two souls quietly acknowledging what words couldn't yet carry. When she lifted her head to look at me, her face was so close that I could see the shimmer of tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I've never felt this way before, and it scares me." I brushed a strand of hair away from her face, my touch gentle, my voice steady though my heart was racing. "We don't have to know everything right now. We just have to be honest with ourselves." That was the moment the walls broke. She closed the tiny space between us, her lips finding mine with a desperation that spoke of all the nights we had denied ourselves, all the longing we had buried deep. The kiss was trembling, fragile at first, but when I didn't pull away, it deepened, turning into something fierce, something real. My hands cupped her face, hers gripped my shirt as though she was afraid I would vanish, and for those seconds, the world outside didn't exist. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and shaking, reality came rushing back, heavy and undeniable. She pressed her forehead against mine, her eyes closed, and whispered, "We're crossing a line we can't uncross." I swallowed hard, my voice quiet but resolute. "Maybe that's what we're meant to do." Her tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't let go. Instead, she held on to me tighter, as though the thought of letting go was more terrifying than the consequences of holding on. That night, we didn't run. We didn't pretend. We sat in each other's arms, talking in hushed voices about everything and nothing, our fears, our dreams, the weight of what this meant. We knew the risks, the dangers, the way the world would judge us if they knew. But in that fragile, stolen moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the way her hand fit in mine, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me, and the way my heart finally felt like it had found its place. I fell asleep with her head resting against me, and for the first time, I didn't feel like we were lost in something forbidden. I felt like we were exactly where we were meant to be, even if the world would never understand. The morning after felt heavier than I expected. Sunlight poured into the room as if nothing in the world had changed, yet everything inside me was different. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, her hair tied back, making coffee like it was just another day. But when our eyes met, there was a silence between us that held the truth of the night before. We didn't speak about it right away, though our bodies betrayed us in small ways, her hand lingering when she passed me a cup, my gaze refusing to let go of hers. Still, there was a shadow creeping in, the awareness of what we had done and the unspoken question of what it meant. We tried to move through the day as if life was ordinary, but nothing about it was. Every moment together felt like it carried a weight. At one point, she laughed at something I said, a light laugh that would normally be simple and carefree, but this time it cracked under the pressure of everything left unsaid. Later, when we were alone again, she finally let the fear slip out. "What happens if he finds out?" Her voice trembled, and I could see the war inside her eyes. She loved my brother in her own way, or at least had built a life with him, but what we had shared last night was a truth that couldn't be undone. I didn't answer right away because I didn't know how to. The guilt pressed down on me, but so did the longing, and both were so fierce they left me breathless. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, my voice barely above a whisper. "We'll figure it out. We can't erase what happened, and I don't want to." She pulled her hand away then, pacing across the room like she was trying to escape herself. "But it's wrong," she said, her words sharper now. "He's your brother. I'm his wife. We can't just..." Her voice broke before she finished, and she sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. I sat beside her, my heart aching, torn between wanting to comfort her and knowing I was part of the reason she was hurting. "Do you regret it?" I asked, my voice quiet, carrying a fear I didn't want to admit. She lifted her face then, her eyes red but clear, and shook her head. "No. That's the problem. I can't regret it. It felt more real than anything I've ever known. And that terrifies me." Her words sank into me like a blade, painful yet full of truth. I leaned closer, brushing my thumb across her cheek to wipe away a tear. "Then maybe it's not wrong. Maybe what's wrong is pretending it doesn't exist." She looked at me then, her breath uneven, her lips trembling as though caught between a confession and a denial. For a long time, neither of us spoke, caught in the tension of what we wanted and what we feared. The sound of the front door opening snapped us both back to reality. My brother's voice filled the house, cheerful, ordinary, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. We sprang apart like guilty children, and the silence between us became even heavier. The rest of the evening was unbearable. Every word I spoke to him felt like a lie, every smile she gave him felt forced, and every glance we stole at each other carried a dangerous weight. It was clear we couldn't go on like this, yet neither of us knew how to stop. That night, when I was finally alone in my room, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything. Her touch, her kiss, her tears, they haunted me. I told myself to be strong, to bury this, but when I closed my eyes, I could still feel her against me, still hear her voice whispering the truth she was too afraid to say out loud. We were living on borrowed time, and I knew it. The question was whether we would find a way to keep this hidden, or if the truth would tear everything apart before we were ready. The days that followed were like walking on glass. Every step felt dangerous, every word spoken around my brother felt like it could shatter everything. I tried to avoid her, but avoiding her only made me crave her more. It was worse in the small moments, passing each other in the hallway, catching her watching me when she thought no one noticed, brushing shoulders in the kitchen where it all began. The tension was suffocating, and I could feel the weight of the truth pressing harder with each passing day. I knew it couldn't last. Something had to give. One evening, when the house was unusually quiet, the storm finally broke. My brother had gone out with some friends, and it was just the two of us again. I found her in the kitchen, the same kitchen that had become the silent witness to our secret, and for a long moment we simply stared at each other. There was fear in her eyes, but also longing, and I knew she saw the same war raging inside me. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's tearing me apart." I stepped closer, my chest tight, every word stuck in my throat. "Do you want to stop?" She didn't answer right away, but her silence spoke volumes. Her hands trembled as she set down the dish she was holding, and then she looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "All I know is that when I'm with you, I feel alive. And when I'm without you, I feel like I'm suffocating." Her confession tore through me, because it was the same truth I had been carrying. I reached out, taking her hand gently, feeling it shake in mine. "Then we can't pretend anymore. We can't keep hiding behind guilt. We need to face this." She looked at me as if I had asked her to leap off a cliff. "Face it? How? Tell him? Destroy his life? Destroy the family?" Her voice cracked, and I saw her breaking apart under the weight of it all. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. "I don't have all the answers. But I know we can't keep living like this. Lying to him, lying to ourselves. It's killing us." She buried her face in my chest, her tears soaking through my shirt, and for the first time, I felt how broken she really was. Not just by what we had done, but by the impossible choice we now faced. For hours we stayed like that, holding on to each other as if letting go would mean drowning. When she finally pulled back, her face was swollen from crying, but her eyes were steady, as if something inside her had shifted. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we can't go halfway. We either commit to the truth, no matter the cost, or we let this end tonight and never look back." Her words hung in the air like a sentence, and I realized this was the moment everything hinged on. My heart was screaming for her, for us, for the love that had grown in the shadows but felt more real than anything else. Yet I also saw the destruction waiting just beyond that choice, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the chaos it would unleash. I wanted to be brave. I wanted to say yes, to choose her, to choose us. But fear clawed at me, reminding me of the damage we would cause. The silence stretched until it was unbearable, and finally, I whispered, "I can't let you go." Her breath hitched, and she cupped my face with trembling hands, her forehead pressing to mine. "Then we walk into the fire together," she said. It was a vow and a sentence all at once. That night we kissed again, not with the reckless passion of before, but with the raw desperation of two people who knew they were standing on the edge of destruction and still choosing to fall. Every touch felt heavier, every whisper more dangerous, because this time it wasn't just about desire, it was about deciding our fate. And as the hours passed, as the night stretched on, I knew nothing would ever be the same. We had chosen each other, and in doing so, we had set a match to everything else. Tomorrow would bring questions, consequences, maybe even the end of the life we knew. But in that moment, holding her in my arms, hearing her breathe against me, I felt something fierce and undeniable. Love, in its most dangerous form. And even if it destroyed us, I knew we would never regret it.